Hey, Unit 7, page 1, Fertilization and Differentiation. What happens after fertilization? The objectives today will be to describe differentiation as well as to identify the importance of mitosis during the process of development. Do now. There are 4 questions on your paper. Please take a moment right now to answer them. Number 1, what are the 2 types of cell division? Number 2, which process is involved in growth? Number 3, which process is involved in inheritance? And number 4, what is a zygote? If you need to, pause the video here. So what are the 2 types of cell division? You should have said mitosis and meiosis. The process involved in growth should be mitosis. The process involved in inheritance is meiosis. And a zygote, I know it's cut off on the screen, that's a fertilized egg. So, let's talk about the process, starting with meiosis. Remember, meiosis makes the sex cells. After meiosis occurs, the egg and sperm join together during the process of fertilization. That creates what we call a zygote. That zygote goes through a process called cleavage to form an embryo. So you can see in this image, this is the female reproductive system, as you can see up here. The ovary creates the egg during ovulation. It's released. Notice that once it gets to the fallopian tube, you can see sperm here entering the egg cell. One enters, and the cell moves along, and it starts to go through mitosis. Notice that the number of cells inside are changing and increasing as it moves to the uterus. Eventually, it will implant itself on the side of the uterus in order to develop the embryo and then the fetus. During cleavage, for your notes, remember that zygote turns into embryo, develops into fetus, and eventually is a baby. Embryo is considered an early developmental stage of a baby. There's rapid mitotic cell division after the egg is fertilized. Remember, mitotic is the same as mitosis, and that's when the cell will divide into identical pieces. You can see at the bottom of your picture, when we go from 2 cell to 4 cell to 8 cell, we're dividing the cells and duplicating the number of cells that exist inside this embryo. Notice that the cells also get smaller as they make these identical copies. In order to fit inside of that embryo, they must continue to reduce in size. Stem cells, you might have heard about before. There's a lot of money in research right now to work on stem cells. During embryonic development, cells that haven't yet been specialized are called stem cells. So they have the potential to be any kind of cell. What's interesting about this is that we could take those cells then and use them to develop any kind of cell that might not be growing properly or might be malfunctioning. In normal development, those stem cells eventually get a function over time. And some of the different functions, you might remember different kinds of cells. They could be tissue cells, they could be skeletal, they could be nervous tissue or muscle. Different organs also have cells. Every cell gets a job through the process of differentiation. Differentiation allows certain genes to be turned on in order for that cell to get its function, and certain genes to be turned off. So if a cell becomes a skin cell, it'll have the genes just to be a skin cell. And any of the genes that would code for it to be a red blood cell or a white blood cell are going to be turned off. That way, it can only do its job as a skin cell. This is when cells get certain jobs and they become specialized during differentiation. You can see in the picture, we start with a zygote. Eventually it becomes something called a blastocyst, which is a ball of cells. And this blastocyst grows into a gastrula. You can see different layers here. So you see this yellow part, there's kind of a middle part here, and then the blue part. And each of these becomes a different layer of cells in the body. So we have something called the ectoderm, and that makes cells that are primarily on the exterior of the body. So things like skin cells or nerve cells or pigment cells. We have germ cells, which create the egg and sperm in here. We have the mesoderm, which is kind of this middle layer that goes around. And that makes things like muscle cells, kidney cells, blood cells. And the endoderm is the inner layer that makes things like lung cells, thyroid cells, pancreatic cells. So all of these different cells, remember, go through the process of differentiation in order to get their job. Summary. Identify how each of the following processes is involved in embryonic development. Think about mitosis and differentiation in your response. At this time, you can pause the video in order to take a moment and write your response. Remember that mitosis allows the zygote to grow into an embryo, fetus, and a baby. You all started your lives as one single cell. In order to get to the trillion cells that you are today, you had to go through the process of mitosis. Mitosis allows those cells to continue to divide and grow. Differentiation, remember, allows the embryo to develop the special structures or the body systems. Remember, each cell will get its job by turning on or off certain genes, and then that cell will be determined to have that function for the rest of its lifetime. Now that you've watched the video, try to come up with 2 questions at the bottom of your notes handout. Things that you would understand after watching this video.